Welcome to Breaking Barriers with R&D, your direct line to Randy Dowdy and David Hula, here to help fellow farmers unlock the potential in their fields. Are you looking to implement best practices that maximize ROI? You've come to the right place. Real value, real yield, real ROI. Breaking Barriers with R&D starts now.
We thank BASF for being the premier sponsor of Breaking Barriers with R&D.
Well, welcome to Breaking Barriers with R&D. Randy, this is their second one now, and we just came off Easter. So a lot was happening Easter Sunday. We went to our sunrise service there on the Chickahominy, saw the sunrise come up, and after the service, we had 3 people profess their faith to Jesus Christ and got baptized in the river. And somebody asked them what the water was like, temperature-wise. They said it was perfect. So,
I bet. Well, I guess no better way to start off the year or this program talking about Easter. David, we got a lot to be thankful for. You know, that grave was temporary and that tomb was temporary for Jesus. But I think as believing Christians, it's going to be temporary for me and you too. I've never heard a pastor till this Sunday say that, you know, that tomb was borrowed, and he always wondered why it was borrowed, simply because Jesus wasn't going to stay there, right? And he said that it was a temporary tomb, that grave was a temporary grave. And he said the part that, as a faith-believing Christian today, is that cemetery or that grave for me and you will be temporary also, because we'll have Lord Almighty one day. So that's fantastic to know. And, you know, what a time of the year. It's Easter. I know we didn't have a frost here. We'd only get that full moon around Easter. And it was a little bit of a cold spell about 10 days ago, but man, it's 90 degrees this week. So it's hot in South Georgia, and temperature heat units are accumulating every day. Nighttime temperatures touching in the upper 50s, low 60s, and having mid 80s, you know, up to 90 degrees during the day. So heat units are being accumulated fast, but it's pretty dry, David. You know, a lot of people's having turn on pivots. The ground, matter of fact, I think there'll be some cotton put in shortly that'll have to go in dry plant. They will, especially on the dryland acres. So, and there's no rain in sight. So we'll see. Wow. Yep.
Yeah. Now for us, you know, we started planting corn yesterday. Oh my goodness, we got to change this.
That's the part. That's the part to take Easton to school and stop by Chick-fil-A just for David.
Yeah, well, that's why I like to take the soil and tissue samples to the lab too, because then I can stop on the way back. But for us, we just started planting corn yesterday. Now we planted some soybeans last week. Barley planted about 100 acres under the pivot. Started some on Thursday, then switched varieties and finished up Friday. Sunday, I went out there and checked, and you could see the little root already. So in less than 48 hours, that goes to show you we had some heat too, and we've had moisture. Now,
you got RimPro seed treatment. What do you
that RimPro plus seed treatment? That's exactly right. Oh my goodness. And but for the neighbors around here, you know, we have some guys that have been planting corn for about 2.5, 3 weeks now. We did get a frost, and some of it turned awfully brown. They're gonna have to do some replanting. And you know, unfortunately, you know, they had a great stand. What I saw, I drove by some and walked out there and checked things out. And man, I was impressed with their singulation. Uniform emergence was decent. I'm not going to say it was what Total Acre would be looking for, but I think the grower somewhat checked the box for himself. But that frost didn't even it out, Dowdy. It just put it all behind. And, you know, some of them are replanted. And, you know, I saw Turbo Till out there working some ground up. But everybody in my county just started planting. And, you know, just give you an idea, you know, we're going to be in the 70s. We got low nighttime temperatures in the 50s. I got wheat that's starting to split boot. Just things are happening now. And, We talked about BASF last week with Kim Tudor, and she was talking about fungicides on corn, and they also mentioned fungicides on wheat. So people got to think about a lot of other things than just raising corn right now. And oh, by the way, just so I don't forget, BASF is still their premier sponsor. So thanks to them. And, we had a chance to hear Ms. Tudor last episode, and excited to see what they're going to have coming down the pike in the future.
I got an article from a guy this morning. He sends out a weekly email and talking about soybeans for this time of year are at a record pace. At a record pace. Now, this is looking at it from a national level. So I think people's listening. The early planted beans are worth the risk. They're still farming, but if you can get them in the ground, there's some free bushels to be had. So I got a question, David. I remember when we first met, you were pretty much small grains. You would double crop beans behind wheat, and then you'd have some wheat, obviously, and some small grains, barley or oats, and then you'd have full season corn. Who are you, and what'd you do with David Hula? Because I heard you say you'd already planted some full season beans last week. Were you doing that just to get the planter ready? What's going on?
Well, it's one of Barley's projects. He's been wanting to see what he can do with some soybeans. And, you think about yields. Dowdy, we've never here had a field average over 100 bushel for soybeans. And mostly, you just mentioned it, we've been double cropping their soybeans. Because of seed quality, we oftentimes put the brakes on planting. We like to wait till the middle of May, 15th to the 20th of May. And that way, when the beans are maturing and as they're starting to senesce, we don't get those late rains that you get. And then we got the high nighttime temperatures or day temperatures, and then the seed quality is poor. So we were always waiting to plant our soybeans. Well, Barley wanted to try to see what he can do on some yields, and I'm all for it. Let's see what we can do. And he's been planting some beans earlier. So he's used the corn planter. So the John Deere 1770 NT, we got the exact Emerge belt delivery system or brush delivery system, and the exact rate starter applicator. And so this allows me to make sure the planter's set before we start doing corn. So you're absolutely right. Get all the bows worked out and uniform depth, and each row's individually. And he's checked that box. So when I got in the planter yesterday to start doing corn, of course you would think everything would go seamless, but you get the electrical gremlins, and it's like, oh my goodness. So I'm planting around the edge of the field, and if you look at the screen, you got the tractor, and then you got a bar that's looked like it's pulling the planter, and then you got the rows. Well, Dowdy, that particular planter going around the field, it was doing like a helicopter. And I'm like, what is wrong here? So, you call the IT folks, and, Marcus there, James River, and Mitch, and, they're right on top of it. They said, hey, go get another receiver, swap them out, see what's happened. And I've already cut the tractor off, unplugged and plugged, and, done everything I thought I could do. We swapped receivers. It started working fine. I put the old receiver back on. It's been working seamless, Dowdy. So can you explain that to me?
So you're telling me you took the old receiver off that was giving you a problem, put another one in, and then he says, you unplugged it and put it back in, and it's working fine.
Yeah, everything's good. So
that's like many days with a lot of these new electronics and features from other companies for sure. I'll just go by there and plug this, and it works fine at lunchtime, and get the Catholic priest out there and cast some demons out of it, and it'll go back to work. That makes no sense. When electronics and technology works, David, it's fun. It's great. But when it don't, it'll make you pull your hair out for sure.
Yeah, but when we go back, when I think about we got all these niceties, and when they are not working, you're absolutely right. It's just driving you insane. But when they are working, they're just the cool benefits to what you're able to do. You're able to tell whether or not you've done a good job before you wait for that corn to come up or those soybeans to come up. And that's given us real time. So even though we do have some struggles, the benefits clearly, in my mind, outweigh any struggles that we have. Now, this particular season, when he was planting soybeans, flawless. We just had some little hiccup, and, we can overcome these little obstacles. And the support staff, y'all know I'm well branded with John Deere, but we got a great IT department there. We got great service there at James River. And yeah, they just knocked it out of the park this time with helping me fix it over the phone. So
that don't always help. Normally I get those 150 an hour service calls that's not covered under warranty. You know how those, right?
Yeah.
These warranties, service calls and by the hour and mileage and all that, they don't cover all that. So,
yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, there's a company out there that's got some pretty strong claims. It's going to be interesting to see how they come through in the future. So anxious to see that. Now, you mentioned that you planted some 30-inch beans, and it was a dual-purpose row. Get some planted early, make sure the planter's working right, help you out to get the bugs worked out for planting corn. But I know you had went from a drill or something that's used to plant cedar or something in the past, because it was easier because you plant a lot of seed beans, cleaning them out. And as you used to say, you picked your battles. But didn't you buy a 15-inch row planter as well?
Yeah. This will be the fourth season we've done this now. We used to start out, previously it was just a John Deere air seeder with the commodity cart, 40-foot drill. Before that we had a smaller drill, and we went to this one, and just covering acres. You could put 270 bushels of seed in the cart, and you could plant all day long without having to stop. And because we have so many different varieties, that drill is extremely easy to clean out. Well, being part of Total Acre, understanding and seeing the value of singulating your soybeans. And once I saw that, and then also having the ability to put stuff in furrow. So we decided, rather than go out and buy a brand new planter, called a dealer and said, hey, we want a good used 40-foot, 1795 planter. And they found one down in North Carolina, went down and looked at it, brought it up here, did their normal program like we do corn, checked everything out, did some bushing work on it, tuned in the meters. It's just ME5, so with it's all electric, and it does have pneumatic downforce. That's the only thing that if we were to change, we'd want to go back with hydraulic, but it's got air. We just left the normal closing system, but Dowdy, from the time we did that, the last 3 years, air yields have done only one thing. They've gone up. Now, we still haven't had that field average over 100 bushel, had some weather things last year, but air farm average has gone up. The first year it went up 7 bushels. The second year we went up 5 bushels. And last year we went up just about 8 bushels. Now, we had a really good year again last year, except for some irrigated because salt water creeped up. But we're getting that singulation. We're also getting better emergence, Dowdy, because we're controlling the depth. The drill, we're just trying to get them covered up. And as I've heard you say, controlled spill. So just when I've heard you say 3 bushels, and we've talked about it with Total Acre, I understand exactly what you're talking about. You're still going across the field. You're planting the seed. You hope you're planting at the right depth. But then you go check, and then as you can control each individual row, as you can control the singulation, spend a little bit more time with the vacuum to enhance singulation based on seed size. Boy, those bushels have just been free from that. And then you start adding stuff in furrow, and it just takes you to the next step or next level. And I'm excited to see how we're going to progress down the road, and just trying to stay in your shadows because we hadn't had no 190 bushel soybeans.
Yeah. Well, it's not a gimme, but, I hadn't had 626 bushels or whatever, 623 or 636. I don't know the number. It's just impressive. Didn't commit that one to memory, but I figured it was unattainable. But regardless, I'm curious, David, Now, you did some 30-inch stuff for barley to play it. Is he going to plant some 15-inch beans also that are full season just to play with that? Or do you think with, Alex is part of Total Acre. Alex has obviously broke my record twice now. He broke my record and then he broke his own. And he's doing a lot on 30s on beans. Now, in his mind, he thinks that there's still some opportunity out there, I think, with 15-inch beans. And I agree. Some areas may struggle with white mold, and it may be problematic. But if you do not struggle with that, I think there's some obvious advantage to singulation, spreading that seed out further in the drill, capturing more sunlight, leaf area index be increase. My question is, I think barley has done this a couple of years now. Didn't he plant some 15s versus 30s the last couple of years on this project? Is he still going to try that? Or do you think that the management opportunities in season, based off some of what Alex is doing with wide drops and things like that, do you think that the 15s over 30s with no management in season is an advantage at this point? Or do you think that, he'll still plant both to spread risk?
Well, he is going to try something different, Dowdy, but it's not going to be the 15-inch planter. He felt like 15's running over too much. We did a lot with the airplane, so we would avoid driving down the road. But he's kind of stuck with the 30-inch, and we don't deal with white mold, so that's one good thing. Thank goodness. And planting early. The one thing that we did notice the first year we planted beans early, I was out doing some crop tours with Total Acre, and Barley sent me some pictures and gave me a call and said, "Hey, what's wrong with these soybeans?" Well, we were getting some sudden death, and we don't see that in late planted soybeans. And we've never even thought about having to put a insecticide or sudden death to help keep, well, not insecticide, but help keep the nematodes out, as well as a sudden death chemistry on the seed. We did do that last year, and that helped a tremendous amount. And we did it again this year. We used some Sultro this year from BASF. I know I've skirted the thing what Barley's going to try new, Dowdy, because I don't know if I want to see your reaction, but then I don't want to hear you say, "David, this just contradicts everything you just said." He's going to take the Soil Warrior and try to plant some soybeans.
I've known Brent and Greg and some of the people with Soil Warrior, and the concept is there from abandoning a fertilizer. I've seen some people actually plant some cover crops that way, but to plant beans with that, I think it's an option. I'm gonna be real interested to see what uniformity of emergence looks like. They come up at the same time. And there's obviously going to be wherever they land and wherever they get covered up. There's no singulation there, right? But it'll be interesting just to see how that compares to your late season behind wheat beans. I don't know that I would get super excited on full season, but hey, you've taught this old dog new tricks before. So I'll be interested to see what the outcome is, try to get them planted similar time frames, but and I guess that'll be on 30s too, because I think your Soil Warrior's on 30s if I'm not mistaken. So it'll be interesting to see. I've heard Brent and them say that they're getting similar yields to what the drills and the seeders have been doing. So I don't think you're going to leave a whole lot on the table from that based off of their credibility. But full season, 100 plus bushel, I mean, I'll take my planter.
Yeah, well, I agree with you, Dowdy, but it's something we're going to try. You got the investment in the machine, so if there's a way you can utilize it even more, and we did cover crop, and we've done stuff there at Mickey's farm or the Gosh farm in Nebraska. But I had a chance to go walk with Brent's cousins, Dan and his family, and walk their soybeans. And clearly, you're not going to get uniform emergence. We get that because some of the seeds going to be deeper than the others. They talked about stepping the population up a little more than they would if they were planted with a row planter. But I could not offset the benefit of what it looked like on that. They weren't spaced out great, but they were spaced out in that 7-inch zone. So there was tremendous amount of pod set, and a lot of the beans mirrored each other. Now, there were some that did not, and we get that because, Dowdy, I've heard you and I've watched you tell growers, go out in the field. If you want to see the value of singulating beans, go out once they got some pods on the plants, pull some that are evenly spaced and some that are not evenly spaced and just count pods. And when you do that, that right there is just kind of give you the idea that, hey, we do need to singulate. And I remember being with some growers, and I walked in a bean field that was planted, and I'm like, who in the world planted these beans? And nobody's going to say, I did, when you ask that kind of question. And when the owners pointed out, one of the guys that was working with them said he planted them, the first thing that came out of my mouth was, you need a pay raise. And the owners, that's not what they wanted to hear. It was because that was probably the best singulated field I had ever walked in my entire life. And I'm like, this is spot on. And I tried to help him try to figure out how to justify his raise by going and pulling some plants evenly spaced and not count pods and showing the difference. And I don't recall what the yields were. I think they ended up with some tougher weather later on in the season, but just singulating and counting the pods on the beans. So trying the Soil Warrior, just going to give it a try. He's going to do some early when the machine gets up at the Western farm to run some strip tilling for corn. Then he's going to do some soybeans. So, and then we'll do some row crop beans right beside it with the corn planter. So we'll have a comparison there for you, Dowdy.
And I think, it's a viable option if you get late, especially behind wheat. You need to manage some of that residue anyhow. Planting late seed beans, I don't think that Soil Warrior would be that hard to clean out either. And post fertilizer, your brother probably won't be arguing too much, but I don't know if he's the one that's going to be planting them anymore. I know Johnny used to be bean planter, so I think that was where you were getting back at one point. But regardless, I think late behind wheat, where you're bumping up populations anyhow, not full season, I think it may actually have a play. But to kind of piggyback on that, we will be planting some beans in Michigan, and the planter got there Saturday, as I understand it. That we're going to run the Soil Warrior ahead of it. I don't know if we're going to plant any Soil Warrior beans, but it might be something now that you've planted that seed that we try, because we're going to run the Soil Warrior with them and out. But we're testing that more about just soil prep and fertilizer placement versus what's been traditional in that area. And we're going to do some tests that way, doing 100% broadcast versus 100% banded, same fertility rates, just banded versus not. And then we're going to back off, 40% of that fertilizer in that band and see if we can make the same yields that way. But it might be interesting because they traditionally plant with a seeder up there on the farm that I'm going to help. And they're going to be planting with a seeder. It might be interesting just to plant some beans with the Soil Warrior at the same time and see if it's comparable to the seeder. And then you would almost eliminate a complete pass across the field. And that's value if the yields are similar. So we may do some of that ourselves. You mind if I plagiarize you for an audit? I won't take that idea, but as my own. But it would be an interesting test because we are going to plant some 30 and 15-inch beans on those strips or off the strips. So we're going to try no-till 15s versus their traditional seeder. We got a lot of tests going in this year, so it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, well, you're clearly not plagiarizing anything we've done. This is something that Brent there at ETS has been trying to get us to try for several years. And just, by the time we get into the beans, the Soil Warrior's been done, cleaned up. The last thing you want to do is pull it back out. But this year, because of our season, we've been so wet. I feel like I've been in South Georgia. It rains all the time. And, we're not getting the rains right now, but we have a chance of some rain today and then again this weekend. But we have historically ran the strip till, the Soil Warrior in February, first part of March, and had several rains on that strip before we get to planting. Well, he's running a Soil Warrior. He just parked it because we ran out of fertilizer, waiting on another tender to come in. Well, we're running it just a day or 2 days in front of the planter. So I'm kind of apprehensive, because we get worried about germination depth. We talked about that time and time again. You're planting into loose conditions, and then you get that rain, and how much is the soil going to compress? So we're doing that Kentucky windage, planting at that 2¼ to 2½ inches. Or that's the plan. I haven't planted in any strips yet this season. The other thing, we're thinking about is, what kind of pressure do we need? Do we need to use any pressure on the planter to help firm it down, or on the furrow force? Do we need to do any more pressure there to help firm it down? And even though we've had plenty of moisture, we're running these strips. We're hoping that's going to dry some of those strips out a little bit. So I'm not so worried about sidewall compaction. That's a big reason for the furrow force, but I am concerned about how much that soil is going to mellow down after we get some rains, and wanting to make sure we stay at that 2-inch germination depth. I know. Yep, slap that hand or step on it. Somebody told me to go walk on it before you.
That's label right here, but I'm afraid I'm not the stupid camera.
Yeah, I know I would. Yep.
But yeah, I know when you started with the Soil Warrior, you had hoped to try it in the fall. Have you tried it in the fall with placement of fertility, David, over the years, or have you always been a few weeks ahead of the planter?
Well, we've never done it in the fall, Dowdy, just because of our soils and putting the fertilizer out. Fish felt like the potash would be gone. We're putting some AMS out there, 100 pounds or so of ammonium sulfate, and just didn't want to lose the benefit of the fertilizer. No, I know the map would be there, but we just haven't done it in the fall. Other things is just the logistics. Farming is, there's a neighbor here, has a big operation, and he describes his operation as nothing but logistics. And I understand what he's talking about. So come the fall, we got the grain cart running, we got the drill going. So we only have 2 tractors. So we just haven't done it. And then it gets wet. Come Thanksgiving, we usually start getting some rains, and then it's over until springtime. So I would like to have some way to firm that zone up. I've had some people tell me, well, go get a roller, run a roller across it. Well, we used to own a roller, and again, logistics. So a friend of mine bought it up in New York. So don't have a roller. So we're just going to figure it out, Dowdy. I'm not worried at all.
Well, David, we would be remiss, and we've got a great guest coming up shortly that's going to tell more about Total Acre and the experience the growers have. But we'd be remiss to not have the king of corn talk a little bit about corn for just a minute. David, historically, I was the first one to beat you to 500, but you quickly surpassed that. And now you've set the bar really, really high. When you look back at the years that you've broke 600 now multiple times, planting date, do you remember the planting dates on those time frames? And just give us a little snapshot, of what that year looked like.
Yeah. Well, sure. The end of April, very beginning of May. And I'm not so hung up on the planting dates, Dowdy, as I am on the temperatures in which we're planting the seed in. We talk about warm soil temperatures. We're clearly warming up now. Air soil temperature running about 63 degrees in the morning at 9 o'clock, 2 inches. But the accumulation of GDUs, we're seeing that because we have these temperatures, nighttime temperatures, and we've always been, well, I don't say always, in the last 15 plus years, we've been looking at a forecast, and, we were thinking that we wanted to Redwood Farms and Paul Bodestein, we talked about 40 GDUs in a 5-day forecast. As we're getting into these higher yield environments, we want higher GDU accumulation in 5 days because we want that corn to come up out of the ground fast. And when I say fast, we're seeing corn from the day of planting out of the ground spiking at that 6 days to not quite 7, and then uniform emergence. And we already talked about seed depth. I want my seed to be 2 inches. I want it to germinate at 2 inches and stay there at 2 inches. I don't want it to germinate at 2, and then all of a sudden we get some soil, some rain, and then the soil compresses, and now we're at 1.75 inches, or maybe even 1.5 inches. So we want it to be at that solid 2 inches. So those things, weather, I look back at the 2 times that we've had the highest yields, and it's turned off great. And then we had a little cool spell about 3 weeks after we planted corn, and then the corn slowed down. And then, of course, it warmed back up, and it was like, all right, just like a normal season. But the one thing, that crystal ball that I don't have is, and I would like to know, is when are we going to have when is the crop going to be flowering and pollinating, and what are the temperatures going to be then? Are we going to have hot, above average nighttime temperatures, or average or below average? And those years we've had the highest yields, we've had those cooler grain fill periods, Dowdy, where we had the crop was putting all that energy into the grain, and we were picking some good corn, but heavy corn, and stayed green for a long time. So those are some of the things. But as growers now, they're planting seed. They need to make sure they're getting a good germination depth and look at forecasts. Don't hesitate to stop planting.
David, people don't understand. People in Total Acre understand germination depth, but there's a big difference between planting depth and germination depth. And, I remember when we first started talking about that with growers, I know I planted at 2 inches. I can read the tape measure. I know how to read them popsicle sticks. I know how to read that seed depth checker. And I'm like, I don't question your ability to ensure that it's 2 inches when that planter leaves the field. What I question is, why am I out here 4 months later or 2 months later, and I'm looking at, root development, and I'm looking at the plant once it's growing, and I see a lot of brace roots above the ground. Have you had a wind event? You had a stress event? Am I seeing a lot of issues with root development? And I said, when you start looking at the germination depth, going from the bottom, the crown of the plant and making your measurements, and it's not 2 inches, Dave. It's just not. There's a big difference between germination depth and planting depth, and a lot of growers don't understand that. And anytime that ground has settled, even in no-tillers, David, you've been a professed no-tiller forever. Does the ground still settle if you're no-till?
Yeah, it does. Well, it oftentimes depends on what type of tillage, if you're running trash sweeps or a no-till coulter, and then what kind of closing system you have. But it will. People think it doesn't, but it does. So you plant 2 inches, you get a bunch of rain, and it's not going to be 2 inches.
It's just not the conventional guys or the people that are running, some kind of tillage ahead of the planter, whether it's vertical till or field cultivator, whatever they're running. There's all facets with it, strip till, and then just stale ground, stale seed bed. It still has a tendency to settle. And as you put it earlier, we just don't know how much that's going to settle. So,
yep. Well, you were doing this earlier, and what I tell growers is, when you go out in the field and you're wanting to check what your seed depth is, take your hand and just hit the soil, smack it, and then check the depth behind that, because that's going to simulate some kind of rain event. It may not be perfect, but it's going to give you a better idea, indication of what you're truly getting at. And tips, that's a timely tip right now. So
dang right. That's invaluable, and a lot of our growers have profited immensely from planning and ensuring that they have 2 inches at the end of the day once that plant comes up. 5, 6, 8 weeks here that proper root development is occurring.
And one last thing is they probably need to check every corn row. Don't just check one row and go adjust them all. It's a novel thought, isn't it, Dowdy? Every row is individual. So take some time, y'all, as you're out there starting. And if you've been planting, go back and check behind you and just check each individual row, see where we are, make sure they're all the same. Because
it's not too late to set it deeper, David.
That's right. Oh, my goodness.
Well, we're going to take a break here, and when we come back, we're going to have Bryce from Total Acre. He's going to share a little information. One of the things that we did, David, when we started Total Acre, Next Level, and now is Total Acre, is we had the concept that maybe people would learn from you and I, and then hopefully they would learn from other growers in the group, but more importantly, they'd find value in the software. So I had the idea and the vision to collect a lot of data and hopefully collect it around the country that could be useful, because I felt like there was a tremendous void. And then I found some people that we have worked with for years to help collect this data that has been invaluable to this process. And more importantly, the growers that has contributed to a tremendous database. And we want to be able to showcase some of what that power, how it can empower the farmers that are using it. So we'll have Bryce coming back in a few minutes, and can't wait to be able to showcase what the YMS, the yield management software that Total Acre offers.
Veltima fungicide outyields the competition by an average of 7 bushels per acre. But you've never been average. The only competition that really matters is you versus you. And with the performance of Veltima fungicide from BASF, you can take your best results even further. Beat your own record. Get every bushel you deserve. And make this your best season yet with Veltima fungicide from BASF. Always read and follow label directions.
Are you carefully managing fertilizer applications and budget, but still not achieving your yield goals? Micro 500 from AgroLiquid effectively addresses yield-limiting micronutrient deficiencies without the expense of additional applications, nutrient waste, or an unbearable mess. Micro 500's balanced combination of micronutrients is safe to apply, and its compatibility is unmatched. Achieve your yield goals with Micro 500 from AgroLiquid. Find out more at agroliquid.com.
All right. Well, we have today Bryce Mericka. What a name. Did you have fun in college, Bryce, with that name? I mean,
absolutely. Yeah. But before college, when I actually played some sports, it was quite fun to get announced as Bryce Mericka walking up to the plate. It was fun.
As a joke. Wasn't it George Bush that when he would say America, would he kind of leave the A off of that and say America?
Yeah.
So, anyhow, it's our good pleasure. David and I have had a few minutes this morning to chat about our year and maybe give some advice to growers that are listening. But the biggest piece of advice we can give going forward that all of our Total Acre members have been able to freely benefit from is our software. And we've got Bryce. Bryce will let you tell us a little bit about where you're from and what you do in your background. But more importantly, we want you to showcase and be able to just kind of give the audience that's listening and watching a chance to hear about the yield management software. Tell us where you're from, Bryce.
Absolutely. I appreciate the introduction there, Dowdy. Yeah, so Bryce Mericka, I'm from central Piedmont, North Carolina, actually just outside of Brown Summit, where I grew up on a farm my grandfather started in the 60s. That's why you see a Hereford up here on the wall. It was a registered Poult Hereford ranch. And then from there, went to NC State. It's kind of where I was destined to go. My grandfather went there, both my parents. Studied crop and soil science there, and then worked for our Department of Agriculture, worked in the soil nematology lab. And then from there, went to work for BASF for a couple of years, and then had a master's, went to pursue my master's in integrated pest management. at the Ag and Technical University right down the road here, close to home. So a little bit about myself there, but yeah, I'm ready to dive into the yield management system, the software, because high value for the growers here. I think that's why majority of the growers are involved in Total Acre. It brings tremendous value to their operation. So.
Yeah, well, the thing, it's not just about for the growers. It's helped me because, I'm learning from what they're seeing, and we're incorporating a lot of that, from information to trials that you talk about, and then data, and then just a big data set. And I start comparing not just our high yield stuff, but just our regular production, see where we are. So I think growers, that's one of the things, other than networking and learning from Randy, they get to learn from each other through YMS.
Yep, absolutely. That is the neat part. You not only get to learn from experts like yourselves, but being able to network with other growers across the country. And then, we also have the other side of the business where we get to talk about products, and we get to implement trials for product companies. So, and that works through the growers in the program as well. So it's definitely multifaceted. It's a pretty robust business at this point. But just to dive in here, a little bit about the yield management system, YMS for short. This is a little overview for the YMS software. We're going to call it YMS for short, but it is a cloud-based software, which started around 2018. And, there's heavy focus on corn and soybeans for the system, but we do have other crops that we have scaled to, including, spring wheat, winter wheats, durum, even cotton, grass, hay. So it's turned into a really robust system. But we want to include a few quotes from growers within the program down here. And in summary, it's them just talking about, how valuable the program is. Not only the benefit from learning from you guys, David and Randy, but the software itself has really taught growers in the program a lot about their own operations, and then operations of their neighbors as well. So the next slide we're going to touch on here is just, what drives the YMS software? It's data. You hit on it earlier, Hula. It's data. So what we're looking at here is just how much data is in the system up to this point. So soil samples with yield values associated with them, we have about 243,000 data points where soil samples are correlated with yield. As for tissue samples, there are 76,000. Total acres in the YMS program, almost 2 million acres in the program. And then product applications that have been logged into the software by growers is over 220,000. So there's a lot of data sitting in the software at this point, and it's continuously being updated. So I obviously expect that number to climb. But again, this data really helps drive the predictions and recommendations that we're giving growers that are signed up to the Total Acre program that are utilizing YMS.
Well, I think one of the cool things about that also, Bryce, is the fact that the tissue samples and soil samples are all associated with yield. You send tissue samples off to the lab, they're just giving you some numbers. They don't know because they haven't been exposed to what the actual yields were for those values and those plants that they've received. So this is something unique on its own. So that is, I know it's a brainchild of Randy's and from his learning curve, and it is helping all growers because, as you are explaining, this, you're not going to see this anywhere else.
No, yeah, we'll definitely touch on that here later in the presentation, is what that looks like for the grower individually, how to take samples, tissue samples, soil samples, and correlate that to yield on their own farm. So yes, it's a very big deal. I don't know of any other software that has access to that amount of data to give back to the grower. So going to set this up in steps, hopefully. Hopefully it makes sense the way this presentation flows, but we're going to start off with variable rate seeding here within the software. I actually had a grower call this week about Dowdy's checkerboard is what they called it. They were just getting ready to plant, and they wanted to obviously utilize the variable rate seeding maps, the prescriptions that were creating MYMS. They wanted to pull those into the John Deere Operations Center. And they said, hey, where can I find this? I heard Dowdy talking about this checkerboard, managing risk. And I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, Dowdy, because, folks are attributing the checkerboard to Dowdy. So
there you go. Well, it's more about spreading risk. I mean, there's a lot of people to go out there and they variable rate based off soil type. And they have proven the benefits of, variable rating based off soil type, lighter soils, heavier soils, higher yielding zones based off history, et cetera. And the part that I struggle with is those zones typically don't change. Soil types don't change unless you're moving a lot of dirt out there. They pretty much stay where they are. But what does change, David, and I think you will obviously agree with me on this, is that the weather changes during the growing season. We always want those highest yielding spots to remain the highest yielding spots. We want to bring up the lows to hopefully increase the farm averages. But I'm a firm believer that this is a great way to spread risk. It is my versions of calls and puts during the growing season. I'm a big believer in, managing risk. And one of the things that the growers asked me to do was, how do we make money? And they want to increase profitability on the farm. They want to increase yields on the farm, but they want to increase ROI. And this is my way that if it turns out to be cloudy, we got some varying populations across the whole field, not just about soil type, but did the weather change? Did we have sunshine premium year? Do we have adequate rainfall? Do we have a cloudy year? And a lot of people go out there and they'll plant in their heavier ground that has better soil holding capacity at a higher population because of yield history or just potential in their eyes. But what if it turns out to be a cloudy year, David, and they've got these plants out here at 38 or 40,000 or 36,000? What if they needed 28,000? And I believe that every farmer out there should plant at least 3 to 4 populations. I don't care if they're in blocks. I don't care if you do them in the checkerboard fashion that we see above. Just, I believe that there should be 3 or 4 populations and 2 to 3 hybrids in every field, just to spread risk, because we do not know what the weather's going to be like post-tassel. And that's really when it matters. Yield is influenced significantly the first 1,300 GDUs, but whether you capture that yield or get that heavy corn that David talked about earlier, is going to come during that grain fill period and late grain fill period. And sunlight plays such a big role. And I've told David numerous times, if we could develop sunlight in the jug, we could retire a horse. I mean, that would be a big deal for us. And this is a way to manage sunlight by population. And I guess that's kind of what they're calling the checkerboard pattern after me. But it's a great way to have calls and puts with the planter. It turns out to be cloudy, you're in the game. It turns out to be a sunshine premium year, you're in the game. And it's all the way across that field. And I'm a big advocate in this. David, what do you think?
Oh, I agree. We do it. I don't do the checkerboard like that, but we do strips. We'll either load up prescriptions or just in there 2 different hybrids in the planter and change the populations within 4,000 of each other. So,
and you feel that in that legend there that they're changing by 4,000, David. And that's the part that's important. When you change that 4,000, you can actually see it on the yield monitor then. These 2,000, seed count changes, it's just hard to see. But when you start going 4, now you can see the progress or see where the changes are occurring.
Yep. And I'd say the neat thing to add to that is, how easy it is to pull these prescriptions out. There's an ability with the software to create shapefile formats to pull prescriptions out, or you could send them directly to monitor type. So it should cover the basis for any situation a grower's going to see for it to be applicable to their monitor types or getting it in the John Deere Operations Center, climate, etc. So the next thing we want to touch on here is flag tests for emergence. Hula loves this, I know. And I think it's a great tool within YMS as well. So really what we're trying to do here is have growers go out and mark plants as they emerge and then capture the window within that plants emerge. And we're calculating a flag test tax, which is the tax is pretty much how much yield you're losing by not getting uniform and timely emergence. So Hula, if you want to talk a little bit further about that, because I know that you love this topic. It comes up all the time with the grower clinic. So,
well, it's a report card for the guy that's running the planter. So, but it's also a report card for the seed that they're putting in the planter, and then maybe some products that they're putting in as well with the planter. But it's important, and the thing about the value of this, it's identifying the fields that have the greatest potential to be influenced because they come up uniformly. Of a year like 2025, where margins are tight, and you're going to invest in either some chemistry, some fertility, some of these biologicals, you want to have the chance to influence as much of your crop as you possibly can. So if we have a crop that comes up uniformly, then when you make that application, now you're influencing that crop. But if your crop does not come up uniformly, you're only influencing the portion of the crop that came up uniformly or partially uniformly early. Then the crop that came up or the portion that came up later, you're not truly influencing that crop. So you're spending good money on a bad environment. So I'm a big proponent of this. And we do it on tracts of ground. We do it on fields. We do it on hybrids. If we're trying to learn something, it takes time though. And, you can Google it. I know in YMS we explain to do that, and it would take too long to do that now. But there are companies out there that'll send you flags so you can do it yourself.
Yep. So get it done.
Exactly right.
Yep. The next part of the software, probably my favorite, honestly, and the one I like to highlight the most, are the soil recommendations. So here you can see, well, you can't see my mouse actually, so I can't show you, but what it's pretty much showing you is when we have 1 acre grid soil samples, we throw those into the system. On the left, you see the current soil results. Those are the soil values from the soil samples without any applications made. What you see on the right are projected soil results when we start playing with applications and rates in that field. And what's neat about the software is you see the select value feature in the middle. We can select a certain target that we're trying to go after. So pH in this instance, when we're applying lime at a specific grade, we can see projected soil results over to the right on a field basis. So not only are we able to look at sufficiency for most of these attributes, but we also have tied in ratios, which is incredible to me because, sufficiency is one thing for soil, but then, ratios are a whole nother deal, and it gets that complex. It has to. And the last thing I'll say here before I want to open it up is, these are based on yield goals. All that data that we have collected within the system up to this point, we have a good idea about what type of fertility, amount of fertility it takes to achieve a yield goal. So when you enter a yield goal in YMS, these product applications are going to be adjusted to meet that yield goal.
Well, first you said 1 acre grids. Oh my goodness. Who in the world would have thought that, Dowdy?
Well, you mentioned it many times, David, and I said at the beginning, it's kind of like looking at a shoulder injury or elbow injury with an X-ray versus the MRI. There's just a lot more detail with that 1 acre grid, and it's a no-brainer. But Bryce, you mentioned something about these are based off yield goals. I'm gonna correct you just a second, and let's say it a different way. These are our soil recs are based off the fact that guys actually attained the yields. Wasn't just a yield goal. Every soil recommendation that we give, somebody actually made those yields with these fertility levels that we're recommending. And we take that aggregate and put it together. And then that becomes a yield goal that people will put in there. If a guy wants 250 bushel yield, it queries against the database every guy that's ever made 250 bushel corn, or 200, if that's your yield or the crop that you're growing. Now it's using the data from that every guy that made 250, what were their actual soil values? And then for 300 and 325 and 400, et cetera. So it's the yield goal helps drive it, but really, truly, the recommendations coming from people that actually attain the yields as a whole. Yep. And
that's a very good point.
I knew what you meant. I knew what you meant, but I want to make sure that the viewer or the people that's listening, this data is not something theoretical like the labs are and a lot of university datas are, or even some consultants. This data is backed up by hardcore evidence that these yields were actually attained. And that's what makes this product offering in YMS unique, because, Soil Lab may tell you, here's the levels that we recommend. Most of the time, they don't get yield maps. They don't get as applied maps. They don't get tissue sample maps throughout the year. They don't know what products was applied throughout the season as applied maps. They don't get to see all that. We see it all. And then we make, obviously, from that data set, we're able to make real world recommendations of what's been attained by values, by organic matter, by CEC, by soil type, all of those things. So it's really driven by actual data.
I really appreciate that clarification, Dowdy, and that's a very fair point. Is yes, we do have the data in the system. We know what type of fertility, what type of management it took to attain that yield. So you are 100% correct, and I appreciate that. The next thing we're going to touch on, the next thing we're going to touch on here is the season roadmap. And this is something that is not only influenced by the data in the system, but you have your finger on as well. At the grower clinic at the end of the year, when you're discussing products and practices that move the needle, you're touching on the season roadmap, must-do process steps for management. So this is something that you guys have your finger on, and this is something that growers have access to within the software. It changes, obviously, based on corn and soybeans, and I think I might let Hula talk to corn and Dowdy talk to beans, but don't know how in-depth you'd like to go on the must-do process steps, but it's very valuable for the growers.
Well, I think rather than going into depth, I think it just gives them the platform. All right, you check this box. This is what you've done. Now you go to the next step. Whether it be called a roadmap. So it's giving that grower the opportunity to understand, hey, here I am. This is what I need to be doing now. And then, I need to start planning ahead because this map is telling me in another 200 GDUs, you have to make an application, or you need to be done by a certain GDU mark. And that right there just gives growers a chance to focus on prioritizing what their workload needs to be. And there are times I find myself to where we need to be doing all this applications and we only have one sprayer. So that's when I call and say, hey, I need some more help, whether it's the area applicator or my nutrient provider or independent. Somebody comes and helps knock it all out because we know the value of getting these things done specifically at certain times.
Well, David, the difference between a good farmer and a great farmer is timing and attention to detail. And part of the reason why we created a roadmap is not everybody can stand up, articulate. Most farmers know what they do, and they have notes, and they know what they've done for years. But when we start talking about concepts that's maybe differs from what they're used to, not everybody has my memory or your memory to be able to do this. So what we did is we put a roadmap there of, once as the crop grows, it accumulates heat, and there are some key timings in that crop's lifespan that is very critical to either capturing that yield potential or losing it. It's just the way it is. And what we don't want them to be, we want them to be that great farmer. It's just like I said, the difference between a good farmer and a great farmer often is timing and attention to detail. So what we try to do, David, is put a roadmap. We call them must-do processes or steps, but we also give them just things that we would consider appropriate if we were farming there with them, that we would make as recommendations, but we can't be there. And we don't want them to have to remember or misremember what we did say before, because we do articulate this verbally, but we do send out text messages when we know that they planted. We give them friendly reminders. Hey, this is coming up. They get the text message reminders. They also have it at their fingertips on, obviously the software and the computer, but it's to, hey, don't forget these things, because we don't want them to miss the timing and attention to detail items that we feel like the data has proven provides ROI, but based off our experience as well. So that's the whole purpose behind the must-do process and the must-do steps. Is simply a friendly reminder. Here's what we think you should be doing. Now, figure out a way to get it done on as many acres as possible.
Yep. So the next piece we're going to talk about here is tissue sampling. So not only is this information through tissue sampling valuable for end of year analysis, correlating that to fertility, but we're getting in season measurements, and we can react to these measurements. So we're making this really easy on the grower and YMS. We're having the growers send all the tissue samples to one lab so we can have a standardized measurement across the board, because that's really important. When you go in to analyze data, you want consistency. And that's what we're striving to do here, on top of making it easy for the grower to collect and send off. So the neat thing about tissue sampling in YMS is you can select multiple locations in the field and drop pins. It's really handy for running trials and just looking at an average yield location versus a high yield location. So, and then to generate most of these sufficiency analysis results, as well as nutrient power ranking results, which we're going to touch on here in a couple slides, you need to enter relative maturity. So all of our recommendations for corn especially tie in relative maturity. So with that amount of data, with that robust of a data set, we're honing in that tightly on these analyses.
Well, and tissue samples been something that's been a part of mine and David's success for a long time. But again, we take that to the next level. One of the biggest things that I've seen that's been problematic among a lot of labs that analyze data, they don't have yield maps. They don't have yield maps associated with their recommendations. So while David talked about germination depth and getting plants up uniformly, and we do a flag test to make sure that actually occurred, it's a process, it's a system. Once we check boxes, we feel like the yield is not limited anymore. And then we're constantly checking boxes throughout the process. So if we get germination depth right, if we get emergence correct and uniform, and that box is checked, then David and I start looking at tissue samples. Now, is the plant capable? Did it come up in that 6th or 7th day that David referenced before burning up all that seed energy? Now we start to live off sunlight and root development. Now, what are the values of nutrition within that plant? Do we need to make an application with a ground rig? Do we need to foliar feed it? Is our application methods proper or not? Do we broadcast fertilizer? Is it in the plant? Is it not? I don't know anybody that can look at a plant and tell what's in it by looking at it, David. So they got to have some form of data. And these tissue samples for us is paramount. It's another box that we need to check. This is a controllable, in my opinion. All these things we've talked about are controllables, and it's about controlling the controllables. And whether or not we reach that yield outcome to service that debt that we need to service down the road, right? So keep going, Bryce.
All right. So this one right here, tissue recommendations.
And he shows here
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, our tissue recommendations, this is looking at sufficiency right here. We're basing this off a yield goal again. So when Dowdy said earlier, we have all this data in the system that we knew what kind of tissue sample fertility correlated to yield goal. This is where this wraps in. So you go in and you set your yield goal. It needs to be realistic, obviously. We'll show you that on the next slide, what's not realistic. So according to a realistic 250 bushel yield goal in this instance, we're seeing week over week that these tissue samples are sufficient. They're in the green. These are going to be color coded green, yellow, red. Across the board, this is a really good tissue sample result week to week, and we expect that 250 bushel yield goal to be attained. This next slide here shows you what it looks like for an unrealistic yield goal. And you see a lot of red on these tissue sample results. So again, looking at sufficiency here, the tissue sample values would not correlate to a 400 bushel yield environment. So we need to back off on that. And you'll see here, the actual yield for this field for this scenario is 258 bushel. So we need to be realistic in our goals. And, we have the ability within the system to go change yield goal as we move throughout the season, which is nice.
And frankly, Bryce and David, people need to know when to spend money. They also need to know when to stop spending money. And we may all be delusional and want to win a contest and shoot for 400 bushel corn because David Hula and Randy Dowdy's done it, but that don't mean it's attainable. And these are boxes that we can check. But the cool part about this, Bryce and David, every person that made 250 bushel yield corn or yield goals, or actually made that yield, we are querying against their GDU mark, that point in that plant's life. What were their yield goals versus what were their yields actually attained versus that point in that plant's life? So it's querying against everybody in the system. Again, somebody actually made the yields. This is not fictitious. This is not about average. This is about, these are the yields by that GDU in that plant's life. Is it sufficient for that yield goal? Yes or no? So that's what we're querying against. That's a novel idea. It's one that I had a long time ago, and I don't know that anybody else out there has the wealth of data that we have. And a lot of guys find a lot of value in this. David, how many times we've been in the meetings and everybody's got their tissue sample values and they send it off on Monday and they're fussing at us. Hey, it's Thursday. I need my my tissue samples back. When are we going to get these tissue samples back? Sometimes that's the lab, but I can tell you there's a lot of farmers that place a lot of value in understanding are their yield goals going to be met at that point.
Oh yeah. It almost looks like, like they're scratching lottery tickets. They get so excited about seeing what have they done? Like they made an application. Did they make an improvement, or have they still have to do more? Or like we've talked, like you said, Dowdy, don't spend good money on a bad crop. Just when is it time to say, all right, this is just going to be my normal corn. I'm not going to do any more with it. So this data is providing that information for them. So I think of all years, this would probably be one of the bigger years that this data is going to help pay for growers to stop spending money.
David, how many times have we also taken our struggles in a season on tissue sample values and changed our management so we didn't have to constantly chase those stupid foliar applications? How many times have we put more in the strip till or bought more fertilizer up front? These tissue samples have guided my actions a lot over the years because I don't frankly want to make all these applications and buy it in a jug where my cost per acre goes up. I buy dry fertilizer. I do things to release fertility, but these tissue samples help guide that.
Oh yeah. Yes, they have. They've helped us tremendous as well. Cause I was a guy that was spraying 12, 13 times in some fields just to keep spoon feeding the crop. Now we're doing it with Soil Warrior and a lot more things up front to get that balance that I know Bryce is going to talk about a little bit.
Yep, you just hit on it right there. That was a perfect segue to the next slide. So right here, you're just looking at sufficiency. So this is colored green, yellow, red, all strictly based off sufficiency. The next thing, which this gets extremely complex, the next thing that you have to look at is balance, like you're saying. So we have a function in YMS called nutrient power rankings that combines sufficiency, because you need to consider sufficiency even before balance, but balance is the next step. So if you really want to get to that 400 bushel yield mark, it's going to take looking at balance. So we factor in sufficiency and balance, which is a combination of ratios of a nutrient to every other nutrient in that profile. So not to share too much on this, because this needs to stay within Total Acre, and obviously access to this as a grower. But what we're doing here is just telling you what's out of balance on the low side, what's kicked into red, what we would consider green within balance at that growth stage, and then yellow would be out of balance. It is excessive, which is probably affecting nutrients on the far end that are out of balance low. So although you may be in the green sufficient, when we were talking about sufficiency earlier, you may be green, but how far into the green are you? Are you just keep spoon feeding that crop and keep getting the levels up and up and up, and you're not considering what it's doing to the other nutrients within the plant? This helps you consider that.
Yeah. I mean, Bryce, you hit the nail on the head. I think the term balance and ratios gets overused because a lot of times people don't understand how to explain it or what's going on. And they're either trying to sell a particular product, or a grower in his mind, he says, well, for me to make a change, he's like, well, I want to improve my corn yield by 25 bushels. What's the first thing that they think about? Well, I need more nitrogen. Or, hey, I got to plant it a little bit thicker, or I need a different hybrid. Let's say they do that. They put a different hybrid in, they plant a little thicker, and then they add more nitrogen. Well, all they've done is influence one thing. Now they could have easily created an imbalance, because we realize that, hey, with nitrogen, we know we need a ratio of nitrogen to sulfur. And then we think about, well, if we've done that, then what is our ratio for nitrogen to some potash? And then what other ratios are we having going on? So when you look at this power ranking, it's kind of taking those things into play. And then we can, with the growers, we can intelligently talk about what balance is and where we're going out of step. Dowdy, I've seen pictures of you having piles of chicken litter, and I've accused you of spreading it with a bulldozer. But, when growers go out and put on certain nutrients like that, animal waste or chicken litters, they're adding stuff, but then now they've created another imbalance in there. So as a grower, you got to understand which ones are hurting you. And until you either pull a tissue sample and a soil sample and understand where your shortcomings are, you don't know what to do. And this is what the power ranking's done. And I've heard growers, and I like what we've seen, because me working with Paul Bodenstein, our agronomist, for 20 plus years, he's been focused on balance. To me, it's become second nature, and growers need to understand it as well. So this is an easy way for them to do it, Bryce.
Yep, absolutely. I think this is a really beneficial tool for the growers, and somewhat underutilized in the group at this point. I'd like to see more people get on the train and really understand balance. They love to stick to sufficiency because it's something that they know. Granted, it gets more complex, but it's the next piece of the puzzle. So something else that we house within the YMS system are product recommendations. So as we're getting new tissue sample analysis in throughout the season, you can actually go in and look at recommended products to address a particular nutrient. So this is a part of our products that move the needle segment that we present on at the grower clinic and end of year meetings. But you can actually go in and see products that have performed year over year on driving up nutrients like manganese, zinc, and iron. And you'll get product recommendations for those particular nutrients. So The next piece here I want to touch on is variable rate applications that growers are able to log in YMS. Obviously, they're making an application and bringing that data into our system. But this is just an example here of a DAP application. I remember this quite well. It was a strip till application, 30-foot implement widths, and it was staggered. So a strip of reduced rate and then a full rate strip, reduced rate, full rate strip, and so forth, all the way down through the center section of the field. But that's the detail that you're going to be able to see within the YMS software. And this is where we utilize this heavily for trials. But, growers that run a lot of trials on their own on their farm, this could be really useful as well. You get those VRT applications into the system, and you're able to draw in zones and see how those products or practices are performing. So that leads into this slide pretty well. We utilize this a lot for trials, but what you're able to do within the software is take those variable rate applications and overlay those with planting or harvest data, and you can get a true side-by-side look at a lot of these products or practices. I don't know of another piece of software that makes it this easy to go in and overlay all these applications and then create zones. You're able to account for things like hybrid differences, population differences. You can log every single one of your applications that you've made in the season on that field to YMS growing season page, and then you can overlay that here in the Manage Zones tool to draw in zones. So it's a pretty in-depth tool, and I love it. I haven't found a piece of software yet that makes it that easy to run trials. So another piece of the puzzle here is a view performance. This is another adjustment we can make in season. If the grower's logging applications, we can pull out particular nutrient values. So this example right here is looking at boron, and you can see individual tissue sample events. Those are the green circles and yellow triangles. Individual tissue sample events matched up against product applications. So say when we made that product application just above 1,500 GDUs, we saw a spike in boron from the next tissue sampling event. So these are really useful tools for the growers in the system to utilize to see exactly how, when they're making an application, see how they're influencing the crop, see how that nutrient value is going up, hopefully going up. Maybe it's going down and we need to look at a different product or see if nutrient balance is a factor. But this is located on the View Performance tool on the View Growing Season page for growers.
So again, it's just another report card. What worked and what didn't work.
Yep. Good in-season report card. So the next tool that's utilized by growers, probably my favorite tool that's accessible to growers, would be the Field Explorer page. So you can see, Dowdy was talking about sunlight earlier. You can actually see where you are in season for sunlight, whether it's going to be a premium year or a suboptimal year. You can actually see in season how you're stacking up against average. It can be 5-year average. It can be a year average. Useful information, whether you need to know whether to drive that crop or not. And then the soil fertility tool, which is highlighted in the middle right there, that's probably my favorite. I nerd out about that tool a lot, and it separates your highest yielding environment. So you see the top 5% and then the top 25%. That's all staggered by yield. So it goes by yield environment. And then you can see how that correlates to particular soil values or attributes. So that's extremely useful information for me if I was a grower to see how I can drive year to year soil fertility to get yields up. And then the bottom one right there, the soil tissue connection, that is actually a new tool, and it looks at original soil values on the bottom. That's from your soil sample values. And then your early, middle, and late, those are tissue sample results. And you can see how soil values stack up against tissue values. So say, hey, it says I'm more than sufficient in the soil, but I'm not getting it into the plant. That's useful information to know. So that might be a nutrient that I can address with a foliar application, that where I need to drive that nutrient value up in the soil. Yes, it says I'm sufficient, but I'm not getting it into the plant. So that's another tool that it's new, but very useful information.
Sure, I hope the listener, David, because there's a lot of times we buy products. For those that don't pull tissue samples, they hope it's out there, right? It's the hope versus knowing. Hope's a strategy, but it's not a good one. And there's a lot of people that buy products and they never have proof that they get into the plant. But then we got some that pull tissue samples and then maybe they don't get into the plant. Now is something out of balance? Is it a product itself? It's just not available. This type of tool will then and should guide, actions going forward. Maybe I need to do something mid-season. Maybe it was sufficient early. You see where it's categorized in early, mid, and late. Maybe there's another piece of the puzzle on an application that we should consider so that those products are not yield limiting. So this Field Explorer page is invaluable. If they'll pay attention to this, it will guide future actions instead of just hoping that they get yield. They can do something about it.
Yep. It's as close to AI as we have right now, I think, from a predicting standpoint. So yeah, kind of exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that tool's available to growers, and then this one is as well. This is spatial analysis. So you can overlay the yield data heat map you see on the left with other types of information like hybrids, and then you can even further stack that with soil type. So you see these bars down here, goes by silty clay loam, et cetera. But those are color coded to match the hybrids you see above it. So that's another batch of useful information. You can even tie in population, pounds applied of particular nutrients. Again, if you're logging applications, you can actually see total amount of particular nutrient and correlate that to yield on this page. So very, again, useful information. The tools are all there. If you're the kind of grower that wants to push your operation, the tools are there in the system to do it. So the last tool I'll touch on here that a lot of growers love is the search functionality. So not only when you're collecting data for your operation, it's growers helping growers, right? So, if I encounter a particular issue or if I'm trying to change something on my farm, I want to be able to look up, how somebody else did it down the road. And this search functionality tool gives you the ability to do that. So you can set particular parameters to search for, and then you can actually find growers who have addressed that issue, and you can even talk with them. And I know a lot of growers connect that way, and it's really beneficial at the end of the day to advance somebody's operation. And it's just so nice knowing that it's a group that you can do that with, right? A lot of farmers around me who are secretive, they don't want to talk about what works, but this group talks about what works. It's awesome.
Well, what it's done is, a fence makes for good neighbors. Well, now we're taking that fence down and seeing what's on the other side of the fence. And we just keep moving that fence to we find a neighbor that we want to learn from. So I kind of like that.
Yep. So that was my last slide, but I wanted to leave you here. This is Callie Sutton, our grower support specialist. She is in charge of, informing prospective growers on the data, on the system, and she can help you out with getting signed up. I think the QR code actually kicks back to Hula. He made me post that on there, but yeah, she's from South Georgia, so you may have to get Randy Dowdy to help translate for you. She's got a thick old drawl, so he might need to jump in to translate for you, but feel free to contact her.
Imagine having more days of perfect weather, a combine that's more powerful, or even more soybean bushels per acre at harvest. With Revitec fungicide, you don't have to imagine that last one, because it's proven to deliver up to 9.5 more soybean bushels per acre than the competition. With results like that, it's easy to see why Revitec fungicide is the #1 recommended fungicide by soybean farmers. Visit Revitec.com and talk to your BASF retailer today. Always read and follow label directions.
It's time for a crop nutrition plan that gets more return from every drop. Starting with Pro Germinator from AgroLiquid. a complete phosphorus fertilizer product that includes nitrogen, potassium, and iron. More than 30 years of research shows that lower application rates of Pro Germinator often outperform other sources of fertilizer. With AgroLiquid's Pro Germinator, you can apply less and expect more. Find out more at agroliquid.com.
We appreciate your time, and you've done it justice for the people that are interested in our software and interested in Total Acre for sure. And I do hope that QR code gives out David's personal cell phone number. If not, hold on a second, I'll give it to you. I'm kidding. But anyhow, we do appreciate you, Bryce, being a part of this. We do appreciate the work you do behind the scenes, all the staff for that matter. And it is one cool place to be able to find a lot of data that we've been able to originate in our mind, and then has just been a building block. Growers having a wish list to be able to get more data in this area, and we built an expansive tool that's invaluable, unlike anything else out there in the industry. And the cool part is, man, corn's corn, beans are beans. We grow them all over this country, but we've got a lot of data from Canada to South Africa to all over the U.S., where a lot of information has been pulled together. And I've had a lot of university friends that did a lifetime of research that have said, wow, if I could start back over and have access to some of your data, there's no telling what we could glean. I said, well, it's time somebody gleans it for sure. A lot of, and the viewer, I want to leave them with this, and it's no discredit to the universities out there, but you know, if it's not broke, often people don't fix it. And when I got started farming several years ago, David, I asked simple questions that was just plain out, I want to learn how to do something. I need to know X amount of information. And David, there was very little answers. You know, how much of each nutrient does it take to make a bushel of corn? What are the nutrient levels that need to be maintained in the plant so that yields aren't limited? All those little simple questions I felt like were just usual and customary, and the first bases and the first boxes that needed to be touched or checked. And that information has been far and few between. And we started collecting data and building a database, and now we've grown it. But there's not a lot of information that comes from the university system anymore that affects the bottom line of the farmer. But there's a lot of trust in that university system, for sure. We hope to gain that same level of trust with Total Acre, because we're using data where people have actually attained the yields, and then hopefully, been able to share information for more and more and more people to be able to have access to it. So we appreciate all our growers for helping contribute to this data set. But more importantly, we're looking for more farmers. If you're an innovator and an early adopter, consider Total Acre. We think it's a benefit, not just to us, but, we think it'll benefit you and your operation for sure.
Yeah. And what, Dowdy, I couldn't have said it any better, but one of the neat things about the data and YMS, you nor I farm in Nebraska, but we use YMS to create and do what we did there with Mickey Gotch for the TV show. They had a yield goal of having that farm average 300 bushel. And, we got there. And the YMS is one of the things that helped drive it. Now, clearly we had to do some things like growers are doing now, work on the planter, get things, check those boxes. But from a management fertility standpoint and a roadmap, we had it all laid out. So it is a great tool, and look forward to walking in some fields with some new growers in the upcoming seasons. And
it's not too late, baby. It's not too late for 2025. Guys are interested. There's no perfect time to join other than now. It is something that they can still learn from information from. And how important or how invaluable could it be to have somebody like David Hula walk through their field and say, look, or walk through somebody else's field and them be there and witness the way he thinks, the way he digs plants, the way he looks at soil, and the way he explains challenges. You'll get me, Mr. Nice Guy, and David, the tough guy. He's the bad cop. I'm the good cop. But no doubt about it. We can still learn from the fields. We can tell you things that we like or dislike, and we can give you our opinions. But more important, there'll be colleagues there that can show you what they're doing at the local level too. So feel free to take in.
Yep.
David, it's been good with you for this hour. Bryce, as always, good to see you, sir. I know the Total Acre guys, value the fact that we have an agronomist on staff that understands how to explain the data from an agronomic standpoint. So we appreciate that piece of it. Thank you for your time today. Hope this was valuable for everyone. David, next week, tell us what we got. Tell us something we're going to get to talk about, maybe that the farmers will tune in next week and be excited about.
Well, there's for the week coming up for guys that have weed in the ground, it's getting ready to flag leaves out for a lot of guys. You got the spring wheat guys are planting. And then also you got some in the south, the wheat's getting ready to start heading. So need to think about wheat. Now, corn, Dowdy, we got to make sure the planters tuned in. Some folks have already had beans in the ground. They're just sitting there waiting. But the planters are going to start running as they are right now. But a lot of guys in the north are going to start running on some corn the end of this week, first of next week. And then those that have planted, start doing the checks behind the planter. And I can't overemphasize the value of the planter, y'all. And for next time, I hope to be reporting that we got some corn up and we got a good stand. And I'm excited to see what we've done.
I can hear it now. Dowdy, the first box is checked. I can hear it now. He's going to say the first box is checked, and I'm going to know what that's exactly going to mean. That corn came up within that 6 or 7 day window. It's uniform. It's got one flag color. I can hear it now. But David does a great job. At some point, I'll get an invitation back to go back and look at that planter again, David. But we are looking forward to hopefully putting some beans and corn in the ground in Michigan next week. That's the plan, David. I alluded to it earlier. Our goal is to vet some of these things, but we also want to show the difference between those seeders and the planters and some of the new technology. So we're looking forward to being able to showcase some of that up there, and hopefully we'll have a report also.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, being part of Breaking Barriers is always great with you. The R&D side, it's always a pleasure, Mr. Dowdy. And for you growers out there, I want y'all to be safe. And may God bless the seeds that y'all sow.
Amen.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon for another new episode of Breaking Barriers with R&D. Be sure to like and subscribe. And remember, all episodes are available on Farm Journal TV and anywhere podcasts are found.